Marcus Williams pressed his pen against the ledger, the numbers refusing to make sense, when he heard the voice of the man he'd called friend for 22 years say into his phone, "Don't worry, David. 6 more months of funneling cash through the fake vendors and we'll have 15 million. Then we blame Marcus for the bankruptcy, let him take the fall, and buy Rossi's for pennies while he's rotting in prison." Marcus's hand froze mid-calculation. The pen clattered onto his desk. His heart stopped beating, then started again too fast, pounding against his ribs like fists demanding escape. "Now sit back, grab your popcorn and ride along with me." His name was Marcus Williams, 58 years old, a certified public accountant who had managed the books for Rossi's Italian restaurant group for 22 years. His hands bore the calluses of a man who'd worked his way through night school, his eyes strained from decades of reviewing spreadsheets under fluorescent lights, his back permanently curved from hunching over desks in offices that were always too small and too cold. He wore reading glasses that sat halfway down his nose, kept his graying hair cut close to his scalp, and dressed each day in pressed slacks and button-down shirts that he ironed himself every Sunday evening while listening to jazz. It was 7:43 on a Thursday morning in November in Boston, Massachusetts, and Marcus had arrived early at the corporate office of Rossi's Italian restaurant group, as he always did, 2 hours before anyone else, to review the previous day's receipts from all 15 locations scattered across the greater Boston area. The office sat on the 3rd floor of a brick building in the North End, where the smell of fresh bread from the bakery below mixed with the salt air blowing in from Boston Harbor. Marcus had his own small office, barely large enough for his desk, filing cabinets, and the single window that looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door. But it was his space, earned through 2 decades of loyalty and precision. He had been reconciling vendor payments when he heard the voice drifting through the wall from the conference room next door. The voice of Benjamin Costa, 47 years old, the company's chief financial officer, the man Marcus had trained, had mentored, had recommended for promotion, had trusted completely. Benjamin, who called Marcus Uncle Mark, even though they shared no blood. Benjamin, who brought Marcus coffee every morning, who asked about Marcus's daughter in medical school, who stayed late helping Marcus close the books each quarter. Benjamin, whose voice was now speaking words that made Marcus's world tilt sideways. Marcus sat frozen at his desk, his coffee growing cold in the Rossi's branded mug his boss had given him on his 10th anniversary. The voice continued, muffled but clear enough through the thin wall that separated his office from the conference room where Benjamin apparently thought no one could hear. "John's father suspects nothing," Benjamin continued, and Marcus realized he was on a phone call, speaking to someone named David. "The old man still thinks I'm the son he never had. It's pathetic, really. He trusts me more than he trusts his own blood, which makes this almost too easy." Marcus's stomach churned. John Rossi. Benjamin was talking about John Rossi, the 63-year-old owner of Rossi's Italian restaurant group, the man who had built this empire from a single restaurant his immigrant father had opened in 1962. John, who had hired Marcus in 2002 when Marcus was 36 years old, recently divorced, struggling to make child support payments and pay for community college accounting classes. John, who had taken a chance on a black man with an associate's degree and a dream when other companies had shown Marcus the door the moment they saw his face. John, who had become more than Marcus's employer, who had become his friend, his mentor, the man who'd co-signed Marcus's car loan when no bank would, who'd paid for Marcus's daughter's SAT prep course, who'd promoted Marcus to chief accountant and given him a $20,000 bonus when Marcus finally earned his CPA certification at 41 years old. "David, listen to me." Benjamin's voice took on an edge of impatience. "The beauty of this scheme is that all the fake vendor payments trace back to Marcus's approvals. Every single one. His signature, his employee code, his authorization. When the auditors come, and they will come because I'm going to make sure they come, all the evidence points to him." Marcus's vision blurred. He gripped the edge of his desk, feeling the wood grain press into his palms, needing something solid to hold on to as the floor seemed to drop away beneath him. "We've been running this for 18 months, Benjamin continued. Phantom IT services, fake maintenance contracts, non-existent food suppliers. Every payment looks legitimate on paper because I'm the one coding them into the system. But Marcus is the one signing off on them because that's his job. He reviews, he approves, he signs. He has no idea half of these companies don't even exist." The room spun. Marcus thought of the hundreds of invoices he'd reviewed and approved in the past year and a half. Of course he'd approved them. Benjamin was the CFO. Benjamin coded the expenses, categorized them, and prepared them for Marcus's review. Marcus's job was to verify the math, ensure proper categorization, and check that nothing violated their banking covenants. He had no reason to question whether the vendors were real because Benjamin was the one hiring them, and Benjamin was family. Not by blood, but by choice, by years of working side by side, by trust built through 1,000 small moments. 15 million, Benjamin said, and Marcus could hear the smile in his voice. Split 50-50 between us. 7.5 million each, David. Enough to disappear, or better yet, enough to buy Rossi's when it collapses. We'll lowball John when he's desperate. Pick up all 15 locations for maybe 8 million total. Then we flip the real estate, sell the brand, walk away with 30 million. Marcus's hands began to shake. He looked down at the spreadsheet on his desk, at the neat columns of numbers he'd been reviewing, at his own handwritten notes in the margin, at his signature at the bottom of last week's vendor payment batch. His signature, his authorization, his name on documents that were apparently building a prison around him. "What about Marcus?" A tinny voice came through Benjamin's phone, distant but audible. David, whoever he was. "He's been there forever. Won't he notice?" Benjamin laughed, and the sound was so casual, so dismissive, so completely devoid of the warmth he showed Marcus every single day. "Marcus? Uncle Mark is 60 years old and set in his ways. He trusts me completely. He doesn't question anything I put in front of him because why would he? We're friends. We're family." The contempt in Benjamin's voice when he said the word family made Marcus flinch. "Besides, Marcus is exactly who we need to take the fall. A black man with access to company funds and a gambling problem he thinks nobody knows about." Marcus's blood turned to ice. The gambling problem. 3 years ago, Marcus had gone through a rough patch. His daughter's undergraduate tuition had hit at the same time his ex-wife needed surgery, and Marcus had made a terrible decision. He'd gone to Mohegan Sun, convinced himself he could turn $2,000 into $20,000 at the blackjack tables. Instead, he'd lost $8,000 he didn't have, had dug himself into a hole that took him a year to climb out of, working overtime, skipping meals, driving for Uber on weekends. He had told no one except Benjamin, who had found Marcus at his desk one night at 11 p.m., stressed and exhausted, and had gently asked what was wrong. Marcus had broken down, had confessed everything, and Benjamin had listened with sympathy and understanding, had even loaned Marcus $3,000 interest-free to help him get caught up. Benjamin, who was now planning to use that confidence, that moment of vulnerability, as evidence of criminal motive. "When the auditors find the missing money," Benjamin continued, "and they find Marcus's approvals on every fraudulent payment, and they dig a little deeper and discover he had a gambling problem and financial troubles, what conclusion do you think they'll reach? Especially when I, the CFO, come forward shocked and betrayed, with documents showing I'd repeatedly questioned certain expenses, but Marcus had overruled me." "You can fabricate that?" David's voice asked. "I already have," Benjamin said, and Marcus could hear papers rustling. Emails, memos, meeting notes, all backdated, all showing me as the vigilant CFO trying to sound alarms, while Marcus, my trusted mentor, pressured me to approve questionable expenses. It's all in the system, waiting to be discovered. When this blows up, I'm the hero who tried to stop it. Marcus is the villain who betrayed everyone's trust. Marcus felt something break inside his chest, not his heart. though that was breaking too, but something deeper. His faith in people. His belief that hard work and integrity mattered. His trust that the world, while not always fair, at least operated by some basic rules of decency. "What about John?" David asked. "Won't he defend Marcus?" "John will be devastated," Benjamin said, and now his voice held something like satisfaction. "He loves Marcus like a brother. This will destroy him, but the evidence will be overwhelming. Marcus's signatures, his access, his financial motive, and my testimony as the CFO who tried to stop him. John will have no choice but to believe it, and that betrayal, that personal wound, will make him desperate to sell. He'll want nothing to do with Rossi after this. He'll take whatever offer we make just to be done with the nightmare." The conference room fell silent for a moment. Marcus sat paralyzed, unable to move, unable to think beyond the roaring in his ears. "6 more months," Benjamin finally said. "We need 6 more months of payments to hit our target, and then we pull the trigger. I'll tip off the bank about irregularities in the books. They'll demand an audit. The auditors will find exactly what we want them to find. Marcus gets arrested. Rossi collapses. We buy it cheap. Simple, clean, perfect." "And you're sure he won't figure it out?" David pressed. "David, Marcus has reviewed and approved every single fraudulent payment for 18 months and hasn't noticed a thing. The man is smart with numbers, but he's not smart with people. He trusts me. That trust is his weakness, and it's going to be his downfall. By this time next year, Marcus Williams will be in prison, and we'll be millionaires." The call ended. Marcus heard footsteps, heard the conference room door open and close, heard Benjamin's footsteps walking down the hallway toward the elevator, whistling softly, the same cheerful whistle Marcus had heard 1,000 times. Marcus sat in his office, the numbers on his computer screen blurring into meaningless shapes, and tried to understand how his life had just been destroyed by a man he would have trusted with anything. Before we continue with this story, please subscribe to this channel. My mom and dad said I can't get to 1,000 subscriber, let's prove them wrong. Don't forget to like this video, tell us in the comment where you are watching from, and share to more people. Now, let us continue. Marcus Williams had been born in Roxbury, Massachusetts, in 1966, the youngest of 3 children raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nurse's aide at Boston Medical Center. His father had left when Marcus was 4, and Marcus's most vivid childhood memory was watching his mother count coins on the kitchen table, sorting them into piles, trying to figure out which bills could be paid and which would have to wait another week. His mother had been fierce about education. No matter how tired she was, no matter how many hours she'd worked, she checked homework every night, made sure Marcus and his siblings were reading, pushed them toward college even when college seemed like a fantasy for kids from their neighborhood. Marcus's older brother had gotten a full scholarship to UMass and become a teacher. His sister had gone to nursing school and now worked at the same hospital where their mother had cleaned bedpans. Marcus had been good at math. Not just good, exceptional. Numbers made sense to him in a way words never did. He could look at a column of figures and see patterns, spot errors, understand relationships that others missed. His high school guidance counselor had told him he should be an accountant, that with his skills he could have a stable career, a good income, and a future. But college cost money Marcus's family didn't have. So he'd worked. He'd stocked shelves at grocery stores, delivered pizzas, done whatever paid enough to help his mother and save a little for himself. He'd married at 23, a girl from his neighborhood who got pregnant senior year of high school, and Marcus had stepped up, had gotten a job at a bank as a teller, had tried to build a life. The marriage lasted 13 years, long enough to have a daughter, Keisha, who became the center of Marcus's universe. Long enough for his wife to grow tired of their cramped apartment and Marcus's long hours and the fact that he was always working toward some certification or degree that never seemed to come. Long enough for her to leave him for a man with a real career and a house in the suburbs. The divorce had broken something in Marcus, but Keisha had kept him going. He'd gotten his associate's degree at Bunker Hill Community College, taking night classes while working days, had passed the first 2 parts of the CPA exam. had been looking for accounting work when John Rossi had given him a chance. Marcus still remembered that interview. He'd worn a suit borrowed from his brother, had carried a folder with his transcripts and certificates, had been prepared to face rejection when John Rossi, a successful white businessman with every reason to hire someone who looked like him, had instead looked at Marcus's work history and said, "You know how to work. That matters more than where you went to school. When can you start?" Marcus had started the next Monday, and for 22 years, he had poured everything into Rossi's. He'd completed his bachelor's degree taking online classes on weekends. He'd passed the remaining CPA exam sections on his third attempt. He'd learned the restaurant business from the ground up, had memorized the numbers for all 15 locations, knew which restaurants ran lean and which had waste problems, could spot a discrepancy in food costs from 50 feet away. He'd been promoted from junior accountant to senior accountant to chief accountant. His salary had gone from $38,000 to $95,000, enough to afford a small house in Mattapan, to help Keisha through college at Howard University, to start saving for retirement. And he'd become part of the Rossi family. Not officially, not legally, but in the way that mattered. He'd attended John's daughter's wedding, had been invited to family dinners, had spent Christmas Eve at the Rossi home eating homemade pasta and drinking wine while John's mother, the original Mrs. Rossi, had patted his cheek and told him he was a good boy. John Rossi had become more than a boss. He'd become a friend, a mentor, the father figure Marcus had never had. When Marcus's own mother had died 5 years ago, John had closed all 15 restaurants for the afternoon so staff could attend her funeral. When Keisha had gotten into medical school at Tufts, John had framed her acceptance letter and hung it in the corporate office with a plaque that read, "Another Rossi's success story." And Benjamin Costa. God, Benjamin. Marcus had met him 8 years ago when John hired him fresh out of Boston College with an MBA and a resume full of potential. Benjamin had been 29 years old, ambitious, smart, and totally inexperienced in restaurant operations. John had asked Marcus to train him, to teach him the business, and Marcus had done exactly that. He'd taught Benjamin how to read a P&L statement for a restaurant, how to analyze food costs and labor ratios, how to spot theft and waste, how to work with vendors and negotiate contracts. He'd brought Benjamin to restaurant sites, introduced him to managers, showed him the difference between what the numbers said on paper and what was actually happening on the floor. Benjamin had been a good student, quick to learn, respectful, grateful. He'd called Marcus Uncle Mark from the beginning, a term of endearment that had made Marcus's chest swell with pride. When John promoted Benjamin to CFO 3 years ago, Marcus had been the one who recommended it, who vouched for him, who assured John that Benjamin was ready for the responsibility. Benjamin had thanked him with tears in his eyes, had said Marcus was like family to him, had promised he'd never forget everything Marcus had taught him. And now, sitting in his office with those words echoing in his mind, Marcus understood that Benjamin had learned something else from him. He'd learned every vulnerability in Rossi's accounting systems. He'd learned exactly how to exploit them. And he'd learned that Marcus's greatest weakness was trust. Marcus looked at his hands, at the calluses from years of work, at the age spots beginning to appear on his knuckles, at the tremor he couldn't quite control. He was 58 years old. If Benjamin's plan worked, if Marcus was arrested and convicted of embezzlement, he would go to prison. At his age, with his health, with federal sentencing guidelines for white-collar crime, he would die there. And even if by some miracle he avoided prison, his reputation would be destroyed, his CPA license revoked, his name associated forever with betrayal and theft. Every achievement of the past 22 years erased by a lie he couldn't disprove. Keisha would be ashamed of him. She was in her 2nd year of medical school, telling everyone about her father, the accountant who worked for a family business, who'd taught her about integrity and hard work. What would she think when she saw him on the news, arrested for stealing from the man who'd been like family? John would be heartbroken. The betrayal wouldn't just be financial, it would be personal, intimate, a knife in the back from someone he'd loved and trusted. John would lose his business and his faith in people, would spend whatever years he had left wondering how he'd been so blind. And Benjamin would win, would get away with it, would steal $15 million, destroy Marcus's life, destroy John's life, and walk away rich and unpunished. Unless Marcus did something. The thought formed slowly, pushing through the shock and fear. Unless Marcus fought back. Unless he found proof. Unless he exposed the truth before Benjamin could spring his trap. But how? Marcus was an accountant, not a detective. He didn't know the first thing about investigating fraud or gathering evidence beyond his own professional work. And if Benjamin suspected that Marcus knew, if Marcus tipped his hand too early, Benjamin would simply accelerate the timeline, would trigger the audit immediately, would frame Marcus before Marcus could defend himself. Marcus needed proof, needed evidence that would be undeniable, that would survive Benjamin's lies, that would protect John and expose Benjamin and this David person for what they really were. He needed to find the fake vendors, needed to prove they didn't exist, needed to trace the money to wherever Benjamin was hiding it, needed to do all of this without Benjamin knowing, without raising any red flags, while continuing to play the role of the trusting Uncle Mark who suspected nothing. Marcus's chest tightened with fear. He was in his late 50s, comfortable with spreadsheets and tax codes, not corporate espionage. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to go to the police right now, to report what he'd heard, to let authorities handle it. But what had he actually heard? A phone conversation through a wall. No names mentioned that would prove identity beyond reasonable doubt. No direct admission of anything that couldn't be explained away as a misunderstanding or a joke. And when police investigated, what would they find? Exactly what Benjamin wanted them to find. A trail of evidence pointing straight at Marcus. Benjamin had been planning this for 18 months. He had fabricated documents, created false trails, built an ironclad frame. If Marcus went to police now with nothing but an overheard conversation, he'd be dismissed as paranoid or, worse, as a guilty man trying to deflect suspicion before being caught. No. Marcus needed evidence first, needed proof that would be undeniable. Then he could go to John, could show him the truth, could save the company and himself. Marcus took a deep breath, then another. His hands stopped shaking. His vision cleared. The fear was still there, coiled in his stomach like a snake, but beneath it was something else. Something harder. Something that had been forged by 58 years of working twice as hard as everyone else just to be seen as equal, of being underestimated and overlooked and dismissed, of proving again and again that he was capable, that he was worthy, that he belonged. Benjamin had made a mistake. He'd assumed that Marcus's trust made him weak, that his loyalty made him blind, that his age made him slow. Benjamin was about to learn differently. Marcus opened his computer and began to work, this time looking at the numbers not just to verify them, but to question them, to doubt them, to search for the patterns that would reveal the lies hidden underneath. The hunt had begun, and Marcus Williams, who had spent 22 years being invisible, being underestimated, being the trusted black accountant who worked in the background, was about to become the most dangerous person Benjamin Costa had ever encountered. Because Marcus had something Benjamin didn't account for. He had nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is capable of anything. That evening, Marcus did not go home. He called Keisha and told her he was working late on quarter-end reports, a lie that came easier than he'd expected. He ordered Chinese food from the restaurant downstairs, ate it cold at his desk, and began the systematic process of examining 18 months of vendor payments. He started with the assumption that everything Benjamin had submitted was potentially fraudulent. Every vendor, every invoice, every payment. It was the only way to be thorough, the only way to find the truth buried in the numbers. The first thing Marcus noticed was subtle. The fake vendors, if they existed, would need to look legitimate. That meant they needed proper business registration, tax ID numbers, addresses, phone numbers. Benjamin was too smart to create obviously fake entities. He would have put in the work to make them appear real. But real businesses left footprints. They had websites. They had histories. They had other clients. They paid taxes and filed corporate reports and existed in databases beyond Rossi's accounting system. Marcus began to search. He took the first vendor on his list, a company called Summit IT Solutions that had supposedly provided network upgrades for all 15 Rossi's locations over the past year. Marcus had approved payments totaling $478,000 to Summit IT Solutions, spread across monthly invoices that seemed perfectly reasonable. He searched for Summit IT Solutions online, found a website that looked professional at first glance. But when Marcus clicked deeper, he found nothing. No client testimonials, no case studies, no staff directory, no contact information beyond a generic email address and a phone number. The copyright at the bottom of the website read 2022, suggesting the site had been created recently. Marcus called the phone number. It rang 4 times, then went to a generic voicemail that said, "You've reached Summit IT Solutions. Please leave a message." Marcus hung up and searched the Massachusetts Secretary of State's corporate database. Summit IT Solutions was registered as a limited liability company, filed just 2 years ago, with a registered agent named David Chen at an address in Cambridge. David, the name from Benjamin's phone call. Marcus's pulse quickened. He searched for David Chen in Cambridge, found dozens of results, but when he cross-referenced the address on Summit IT's corporate filing, he found it was a UPS store, a mail drop, not a real office. Marcus pulled up the invoices from Summit IT Solutions. They looked perfect. Professional letterhead, detailed descriptions of services, proper formatting. But now, looking with suspicious eyes, Marcus saw things he'd missed before. The invoice numbers weren't sequential. They jumped around randomly, suggesting they'd been created out of order, possibly fabricated. The descriptions of services were vague. Network infrastructure upgrade and security protocol implementation, without specific details about what equipment was installed or what work was actually performed. And most damning, when Marcus looked at the restaurant manager logs from the locations where this work had supposedly been done, there was no record of any IT contractors being on site. No sign-in sheets, no work orders, no manager approvals. The work had never happened because Summit IT Solutions didn't really exist. Marcus sat back in his chair, his heart racing. He'd found one. One fake vendor, one piece of the puzzle. He kept searching, working through the night, and by 3 a.m., he'd identified 7 fake vendors in total. Summit IT Solutions, Prestige Maintenance Services, Northeast Food Distributors, Atlantic HVAC Solutions, Premier Consulting Group, Beacon Security Systems, Commonwealth Compliance Services, all registered within the past 3 years, all with minimal online presence, all with mail drops instead of real offices, all with invoices that looked perfect but described services that had never actually been performed, all paid by Rossi's to the tune of nearly $9 million over 18 months, and all registered to variants of the same name, David Chen, David C. Huang, D. Chen, David Cheng. Different spellings, different combinations, but clearly the same person. Benjamin's partner in the scheme. Marcus documented everything. He took screenshots, printed invoices, created spreadsheets tracking every payment to every fake vendor. He noted the dates Benjamin had coded the expenses, the dates Marcus had approved them, the pattern of payments that had gradually increased over time. But having evidence wasn't enough. Marcus needed to trace where the money had gone after it left Rossi's accounts. The payments had been made by ACH transfer to bank accounts provided by the vendors. If Marcus could prove those bank accounts belonged to Benjamin or David instead of legitimate businesses, he'd have proof of fraud that even Benjamin's fabricated documents couldn't overcome. But getting bank account information required either cooperation from the banks, which would require a court order, or access to Benjamin's personal records, which Marcus didn't have. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhausted, frustrated. He had evidence that the vendors were fake, but not proof of where the money had ultimately gone. Not enough to go to John yet. Not enough to be certain. The office was silent except for the hum of his computer and the distant sound of early morning delivery trucks on the street below. Through his window, the brick wall of the next building was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. Marcus heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, familiar footsteps. His body went rigid. The footsteps stopped outside his office door. A knock, 3 quick raps. "Marcus, you in there?" Benjamin's voice. Cheerful, friendly, concerned. Marcus's mind raced. His computer screen showed the spreadsheet of fake vendors, the evidence he'd been compiling. If Benjamin saw it, everything would end right now. "Just a second," Marcus called out, his voice somehow steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. He minimized the spreadsheet, pulled up a mundane tax form, took a breath to compose himself. Then he opened the door. Benjamin stood in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee from the Starbucks downstairs, his usual morning offering. He was 47 years old, handsome in the way that came from money and good genetics, with dark hair styled with just enough product to look casual, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment. His smile was warm, genuine, the smile of a friend who cared. "Uncle Mark," Benjamin said, his voice full of affection. "I saw your light on from the street. You pull an all-nighter?" "Quarter end," Marcus said, accepting the coffee with hands that didn't quite shake. "You know how it is. Wanted to get ahead of things." "You work too hard," Benjamin said, and he actually looked concerned. "You should delegate more. That's what you've got me for." The irony of those words hung in the air between them, visible only to Marcus. "Old habits," Marcus said. "You know me. Like to see things through myself." Benjamin stepped into the office, glancing at Marcus's computer screen. Marcus fought the urge to move between them, to block the view, knowing that any protective gesture would raise suspicion, but Benjamin just nodded at the tax form on the screen. "Still working on the 1120s? I thought we'd finished those." "Just double-checking some figures," Marcus said. "Found a small discrepancy in the depreciation schedule. Probably nothing, but you know me. Can't let it go until it's perfect." "That's why you're the best," Benjamin said, and he put his hand on Marcus's shoulder, the gesture of a nephew toward a beloved uncle. The weight of that hand, the warmth of it, the casual intimacy of it, made Marcus's skin crawl now that he knew the truth beneath the performance. "Listen," Benjamin continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Got a minute?" Marcus's heart stopped. Did Benjamin know? Had he somehow found out that Marcus had overheard the phone call? Was this the moment when the trap sprang shut? "Of course," Marcus said, sitting down, trying to appear relaxed when every muscle in his body was tensed for fight or flight. Benjamin closed the office door and sat in the single visitor chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his face earnest. "I'm worried about you, Uncle Mark, and I'm worried about some things I've been seeing in the books." The room tilted. This was it. Benjamin was making his move earlier than planned, was going to confront Marcus, was going to build the narrative that would destroy him. "What kind of things?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin pulled out his phone, scrolled through some emails, turned the screen toward Marcus. "Some of these vendor payments, they're starting to seem excessive. Summit IT, Northeast Food Distributors, a few others. The amounts are getting large, and I can't always verify that the services were actually performed." Marcus stared at the phone screen, his mind reeling. Benjamin was questioning the fake vendors. Benjamin was pretending to be concerned about the very payments he himself had orchestrated. This was the setup. This was Benjamin creating his paper trail showing he'd raised concerns while Marcus had ignored them. This was the beginning of the frame. "I've been approving those payments," Marcus said carefully, watching Benjamin's face. "You coded them. Are you saying there's a problem?" "I don't know," Benjamin said, and his voice carried perfect uncertainty, perfect concern. "Maybe I'm being paranoid, but some of these companies, when I try to follow up on the work, I can't seem to get clear answers. And the amounts just keep growing. I wanted to mention it to you before I brought it to John. I figured if anyone would know what's going on, it would be you." The trap was elegant. Benjamin was positioning himself as the vigilant CFO who'd noticed problems and brought them to Marcus's attention. When the fraud was eventually discovered, Benjamin would have these emails, this conversation, this evidence of him trying to sound the alarm while Marcus dismissed his concerns. Marcus had a choice in this moment. He could play along, could pretend to dismiss Benjamin's concerns the way Benjamin expected, or he could do something unexpected. "You're right to be concerned," Marcus said, and watched Benjamin's eyes widen with surprise. "I've been meaning to talk to you about some of these vendors, too. The invoicing has seemed off. Not wrong exactly, but off. I was going to suggest we do a comprehensive vendor audit next month." Benjamin's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, so quick that someone who didn't know the truth would have missed it. But Marcus saw it, saw the flash of alarm quickly covered. "A vendor audit?" Benjamin said, recovering his composure. "That seems extreme." "I was just thinking we could make some phone calls, verify a few things." "With amounts this large, we should be thorough," Marcus pressed. "We bring in an outside firm, have them verify every vendor registration, every service delivery, every payment. Make sure everything is clean. It's best practice, and it'll give John peace of mind." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "That could be expensive and time-consuming. Maybe we start with an internal review first?" "I think we should mention it to John," Marcus said, watching Benjamin carefully. "Let him decide how thorough he wants us to be, unless you think there's a reason we shouldn't." The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Benjamin's face was still friendly, still concerned, but his eyes had gone calculating, reassessing. "No reason at all," Benjamin finally said, standing up. "You're right. Let's talk to John about it. Though maybe we should wait until we have more concrete concerns? Don't want to alarm him unnecessarily?" "Of course," Marcus agreed. "No rush. But soon." Benjamin nodded, smiled, patted Marcus on the shoulder again. "I knew I could count on you, Uncle Mark. We'll figure this out together." He left, closing the door behind him. Marcus waited until the footsteps faded, until he heard the elevator ding, until he was certain he was alone. Then he finally allowed himself to breathe, great gasping breaths that shook his whole body. He'd just declared war. Benjamin now knew that Marcus was looking at the vendors, was considering an audit, was potentially a threat. Benjamin would accelerate his timeline, would move to protect himself, would potentially spring the trap early. Marcus had maybe a week, maybe less, before Benjamin made his move, which meant Marcus had to move first, had to get his evidence to John, had to expose the truth, had to do it now before Benjamin could complete the frame. But Marcus had learned something in that conversation, too. He'd seen the flash of panic in Benjamin's eyes when Marcus suggested an outside audit, which meant Benjamin's scheme wasn't as airtight as he thought. An independent auditor, someone with no stake in the game, would find the fake vendors, would trace the money, would uncover the truth. Benjamin's plan only worked if he controlled the investigation, if he was the one directing auditors to find exactly what he wanted them to find. An unexpected audit, conducted by someone Benjamin couldn't manipulate, would destroy everything. Marcus opened his computer and composed an email to John Rossi, marking it urgent. "John, we need to meet privately today. I've discovered some irregularities in our vendor payments that require immediate attention and confidential discussion. Please don't mention this to anyone until we talk. Marcus." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he gathered every piece of evidence he'd compiled, printed copies, created backup files, and prepared for the conversation that would either save his life or end it. The next move was John's, and Marcus prayed that 22 years of trust and friendship would be enough to make John listen, to make him believe, to make him see the truth before Benjamin could poison the well. John Rossi called Marcus at 9:47 that morning, his voice tight with concern. "What's this about irregularities? What's going on?" "I can't discuss it over the phone," Marcus said, aware that Benjamin could be listening, could be tracking calls. "Can we meet somewhere outside the office? Today?" There was a pause. Marcus could hear the concern in John's breathing, the worry in his silence. My house. 1 hour. Don't tell anyone you're coming. Marcus drove to Wellesley, to the house where he'd spent Christmas Eves and birthday celebrations, where John's late wife had taught him how to make proper marinara sauce, where he'd been welcomed as family. The house was a colonial on 2 acres, elegant but not ostentatious, the kind of place that spoke of old money and good taste. John met him at the door, and Marcus was struck by how much older his friend looked. At 63, John still had thick hair, though it had gone completely white. He was shorter than Marcus, stockier, with the build of a man who'd spent his youth working in restaurant kitchens. His face showed the wear of someone who'd built something from nothing, who carried the weight of 15 restaurants and 200 employees. They sat in John's study, surrounded by photos of 3 generations of Rossis in the restaurant business. Marcus spread his evidence across the mahogany desk, explaining everything. The overheard phone conversation, the fake vendors, the $9 million, David Chen and his shell companies, Benjamin's plan to frame Marcus and bankrupt Rossi's. John listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Marcus finished, John sat back in his leather chair and was silent for a long time. "Benjamin," John finally said, and his voice cracked. "I loved that boy like a son. I trusted him more than I trusted my own blood. How could I not see it?" "He learned from me," Marcus said quietly. "I taught him the system. I showed him every vulnerability. This is partially my fault." "No," John said sharply. "This is Benjamin's fault. His and this David person's. They planned this. They executed it. They were going to destroy you, destroy me, destroy everything my father built." His hands clenched into fists on the desk. "What do we do?" "We need an independent forensic audit," Marcus said. "Someone Benjamin can't control or influence. They'll find everything, trace the money, prove the fraud. But we need to move fast. Benjamin knows I'm asking questions. He's going to accelerate his timeline." John pulled out his phone. "I know someone. Former FBI forensic accountant, now works in the private sector. He owes me a favor. If I tell him this is life or death, he'll start today." "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice heavy. "Benjamin created fake documents showing he'd raised concerns about me. Emails, memos, things that make it look like he was trying to stop fraud while I was committing it. When this comes out, he's going to try to spin it as him being the hero. We need to be prepared for that." John's jaw tightened. "Let him try. I've known you for 22 years. Marcus, I've known Benjamin for 8. If it comes down to your word against his, I know who I believe." The words brought tears to Marcus's eyes. After everything, after the fear and doubt, John believed him, trusted him, stood by him. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice thick. "Benjamin told David that I have a gambling problem. From 3 years ago. He's going to use that as evidence of motive." John waved his hand dismissively. "You had a rough patch and you dealt with it. You told me about it back then, remember? You came to me asking for a loan and I gave it to you, no questions asked. That's not evidence of fraud. That's evidence of you being human and handling your problems." Marcus had forgotten that John knew. Had forgotten that confession 3 years ago, when the stress had become too much and Marcus had broken down and asked for help. John had given him $5,000 and had never mentioned it again, had never made Marcus feel small or ashamed. "The forensic auditor will be here tomorrow," John said, making the call. "His name is Robert Walsh, former FBI, 20 years investigating white-collar crime. If there's evidence to find, he'll find it. In the meantime, we act normal. You go back to the office, do your job, don't let Benjamin suspect anything. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded. "I've been doing it all day." "One more thing," John said, his voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. "When we prove this, when we have Benjamin dead to rights, I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent. I want him in prison. I want him to understand what he tried to do to you. To me. To my family's legacy. No mercy, no deals, no easy way out." "Agreed," Marcus said. They shook hands. Two men who'd built trust over decades, who were about to go to war against someone who'd exploited that very trust. Marcus returned to the office, sat at his desk, and did his job, reviewed invoices, approved payroll, prepared reports. And when Benjamin stopped by with coffee and asked how the meeting with John had gone, Marcus lied with a calm he didn't know he possessed. Just routine stuff. Quarter-end review. He wanted to go over some expansion plans. Benjamin smiled, relieved. Good. For a minute there, I thought maybe something was wrong. Nothing wrong, Marcus said, meeting Benjamin's eyes. Everything's exactly as it should be. Robert Walsh arrived the next day, a thin man in his 60s with sharp eyes and decades of experience finding money people tried to hide. John introduced him as a consultant doing a routine operational audit, nothing unusual, just best practices for a growing company. Benjamin accepted this explanation with visible relaxation. A routine audit he could control, questions he could answer. Nothing to worry about. But Walsh wasn't routine. He was a hunter, and within 3 days he'd found the trail, the fake vendors, the shell companies, the bank accounts in the Cayman Islands where the stolen money had been transferred, the web of LLCs and trusts that led back to Benjamin Costa and David Chen. And more than that, Walsh found the evidence of the frame, the backdated emails Benjamin had created, the false memos, the fabricated paper trail meant to destroy Marcus. All of it time-stamped and tracked in ways Benjamin hadn't realized, showing exactly when each document had been created versus when it had supposedly been written. He's good, Walsh told Marcus and John in a private meeting, but he's not as good as he thinks he is. The digital forensics show everything. The fake vendors, the money trail, the attempted frame of Marcus, all of it. This is FBI-level evidence. Federal prosecutors will love this case. How fast can you document everything? John asked. I already have, Walsh said, handing over a thumb drive. Full forensic report, every piece of evidence, all admissible in court. You could take this to the U.S. Attorney today and have arrests by tomorrow. John looked at Marcus. Your call. You're the one he tried to destroy. Marcus thought about Benjamin's smile, his fake affection, his casual cruelty. Thought about what would have happened if Marcus hadn't overheard that phone call. He would be in prison right now, his life destroyed, while Benjamin lived in luxury on stolen money. Call the FBI, Marcus said. Let's end this. The FBI arrived on a Thursday morning, 6 agents with badges and briefcases, entering the Rossi's corporate office with the kind of professional efficiency that came from executing dozens of white-collar arrests. Benjamin was in his office on the phone when they knocked on his door. Marcus watched from his office across the hall as Benjamin opened the door, saw the badges, and understood instantly. Watched his face go from confusion to comprehension to naked panic in the space of 3 seconds. Benjamin Costa, the lead agent said, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. They read him his rights while handcuffing him. Benjamin's eyes found Marcus, standing in his doorway, watching. And in that moment, all the pretense fell away. The affection, the warmth, the performance of caring, all of it vanished, leaving only rage and hatred. You, Benjamin spat. You did this, after everything I did for you, after I treated you like family. You were stealing from me, John said, appearing beside Marcus. You were framing Marcus. You were destroying my business, and you're right about one thing. I did treat you like family. That's what makes this hurt so much. Benjamin's face twisted with contempt. You're both fools. You and your pathetic friendship, your loyalty, your trust. That's a weakness. I would have gotten away with it if Marcus hadn't been in the office at the wrong time. Just bad luck. Not luck, Marcus said quietly. I work early because I care about this company, because I take my responsibilities seriously, because I understand what loyalty actually means. Those aren't weaknesses. Those are strengths, and they're why you lost. The agents led Benjamin away. He shouted threats and accusations all the way to the elevator, his voice echoing through the office, letting everyone hear the truth. David Chen was arrested the same day in Cambridge, caught trying to board a flight to Taiwan. The money, all $9 million of it, was frozen in Cayman accounts and eventually returned to Rossi's. The evidence Walsh had gathered made the case prosecution-proof. Both men pleaded guilty to avoid trial, but the sentences were harsh. Benjamin got 15 years in federal prison. David got 12. The news coverage was extensive. Local accountant prevents multi-million-dollar fraud. Restaurant empire saved by loyal employee. The hero who almost went to prison for a crime he didn't commit. Marcus hated the attention, the cameras, the reporters calling him brave and vigilant. He had simply done what needed to be done, had protected something he cared about, had refused to let lies triumph over truth. But the aftermath brought changes Marcus hadn't expected. John promoted him to chief financial officer, the position Benjamin had held. Gave him a $100,000 bonus and a 20% raise. Made him a minority partner in the company, giving him equity and a seat on the board. "You saved my life," John told him at the press conference announcing the partnership. "You saved my business. You saved my family's legacy. This is the least I can do." But more than the money or the title, Marcus gained something more valuable: respect, recognition, proof that integrity mattered, that loyalty wasn't weakness, that doing the right thing, even when it was terrifying, even when it cost everything, was worth it. The other employees at Rossi's looked at him differently now. Not as the quiet accountant in the corner office, but as the man who'd stood up to fraud, who'd risked everything, who'd won. Keisha flew home from medical school to attend the celebration dinner John threw at the flagship restaurant. She sat beside her father holding his hand, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Dad," she whispered. "You could have stayed quiet. You could have looked the other way. But you didn't. You fought. And you won." Marcus looked around the table at John and his family, at the restaurant staff who'd worked beside him for decades, at the business that had been saved because one man chose to speak the truth. "I almost didn't," Marcus admitted. "I was terrified. I thought about staying silent, about protecting myself. But your grandmother taught me something when I was young. She said that silence in the face of wrong is the same as participating in it. I couldn't be silent. I couldn't let them win." The criminal trials took months, but Marcus testified at both, explaining the fraud in clear, precise language that juries could understand. Explaining how Benjamin had manipulated the system, how he'd built the frame, how close he'd come to succeeding. The judge, in sentencing Benjamin, said something Marcus would never forget. "You betrayed not just your employer, but your mentor. You destroyed not just professional relationships, but personal ones. You attempted to destroy a good man's life to enrich yourself. There is no excuse, no justification, no redemption for what you tried to do." Marcus watched Benjamin led away in shackles, watched him look back one final time with hatred still burning in his eyes, and Marcus felt not triumph, but sadness. Sadness for what Benjamin could have been, for the potential wasted, for the trust destroyed. But beneath the sadness was steel, a certainty that he'd done the right thing, that he'd protected what mattered, that he'd proven once again that hard work and integrity and courage were not weaknesses, but the strongest weapons a person could possess. 6 months after the arrests, Marcus stood in his new office. The corner office that had once been Benjamin's, looking out over the Boston skyline. He was 59 years old now, had gray hair and reading glasses, and a back that ached from decades of hunching over desks. But he also had equity in a thriving business. Had a daughter in medical school who looked at him with pride instead of shame. Had a friend in John Rossi who trusted him with everything. Had respect from colleagues and peers. And he had a story. A story of how an ordinary accountant, faced with an extraordinary betrayal, had chosen courage over safety, had chosen truth over silence, had chosen to fight even when fighting seemed impossible. John knocked on his door, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Got a minute?" They sat together, 2 friends who'd been through war and survived, and talked about expansion plans, about new restaurants, about the future. "You know," John said after a while. I've been thinking about what Benjamin said, about trust being a weakness. And? Marcus prompted. He was wrong. Trust isn't weakness. Trust is what builds everything worth having. Families, friendships, businesses, communities. Yes, trust can be betrayed. Yes, it can be exploited. But without it, we have nothing. Benjamin betrayed my trust, but that doesn't mean I was wrong to give it. It means he was wrong to abuse it. Marcus nodded. I learned something too. I learned that being underestimated is sometimes an advantage. Benjamin thought I was too old, too trusting, too set in my ways to notice what he was doing. That underestimation gave me time to gather evidence, to build a case, to stop him. To being underestimated, John said, raising his coffee cup. To being underestimated, Marcus echoed, touching his cup to John's. They drank to survival, to friendship, to the simple truth that good people, working together, could still triumph over those who sought to destroy them. In the end, it was not wealth or cunning or ruthless ambition that had prevailed, but something simpler and stronger. Loyalty, integrity, the courage to speak truth when silence would have been easier, the refusal to let betrayal define the story. Marcus Williams had been just an accountant with a calculator and a commitment to doing his job well. But when faced with a choice between his own safety and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, he had chosen the harder path, had chosen to fight, had chosen to trust that truth, when spoken clearly and backed by evidence, would be stronger than lies. And he had been right. The empire Benjamin tried to steal thrived under new leadership that valued integrity over profit, loyalty over exploitation, truth over convenient fiction. The employees who had almost lost their jobs when Rossi's would have collapsed kept their livelihoods. The family legacy that had started with an immigrant's dream in 1962 continued, stronger than before. And Marcus Williams, who had spent 22 years being invisible, being the quiet man in the corner office who made the numbers work, became something more. Not a hero in the traditional sense, but something better. A reminder that ordinary people, faced with extraordinary circumstances, are capable of extraordinary courage. That the greatest battles are not fought with weapons or violence, but with evidence and truth and the simple refusal to accept injustice. That betrayal, no matter how carefully planned, cannot withstand the light of exposure. And that one person, choosing to speak when silence would be easier, choosing to fight when surrender would be safer, choosing to trust in justice when cynicism seems smarter, can change everything. If you enjoy this story, we can prove my mom wrong. My mom and dad said I can't reach 1,000 subscriber. Please subscribe to the channel. It means everything to us. Like, comment, and share for more people to hear the betrayal tales. This is Fortune Tales.